just wanna get by, and I just lie. Oh, I want so much more out of this life. Do you feel the light? Go wake up. Wake up, hey. Wake up. Don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep. And I just want to fly. CC number 23 is a little high. I believe I can fly. Now woke up. Wake up, hey. Wake up. Don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep.
Raggy! Raggy! Where's Raggy? Raggy's not here.
Coming to you live with the stolen intro out in my dad's back 40, where today, if that really bad Scooby-Doo impression didn't scare you away, I'm going to be showing you all of these guys. Oh boy. Okay, so just so we can have a little bit of space, let's clear everything off. Try to keep them all in chronological order. Okay, so what we have here is from what I am calling the E-tape era. If you can't tell, it's because of all the freaking E-tape in it. So, this thing was actually the third whip I ever made. And it was just, it's still really bad. I mean, look at this thing. Look at it. When you can get a whip to wind up that tightly, is not the best whip in the world. Sometimes it can be excused, like if it has a cable core, I mean, and no binding. But this really shows you what happens when you use electrical tape in your whip. When I first finished this thing, that was about where you could get it to go. Now look at it. Yeah, so what happened, you might be asking, this whip doesn't look very used. That's because it sucks. What happened was I left it out in the sun for 2 hours. Everything melted, and now it's just really soft, and it's a pain in the butt to crack. So here's a lesson for all you new whip makers out there. If you're even considering using electrical tape, don't. Excuse me. A better thing to use, well, I don't use it and I don't recommend it really, well, I kind of recommend it. I recommend it over E-tape, is hockey tape, because it will not do this. Oh yeah, and also use binding. That's also a good thing to think about. And what we have here is a whip left over from what I like to call the zero binding age. This is approximately 4 years old at this point, and this was way back, well, 2 years after I started. At that point, this was the 6th whip I made. There was one before it that kind of died. Yay for dying whips. But this used to be 6 foot. At this point, in time, I didn't have really any idea what the words whip care meant. Not the last one, just the first two. And it's now approximately 2.5 feet long. Yay! No! So as you can see here, kinda, you might be able to tell by the fact that this orange is brighter than this orange. Right there. This whip used to have an end knot. This was back when I was using big old steel bolts as end knots instead of the special material I do now, which is 10 times better than bolts. I would have this problem with the knot actually slipping off the bolt. So yeah, that slipped off. This whole thing's falling apart. We're just gonna throw that over there and try to forget it existed. Sound good to you guys? Good. Okay, this guy's next up on the chopping block. This guy, it might look a little beat up, but it kind of holds a special place in my heart, because this was actually my first whip that I ever tried to do fancy plating on. Hey, thanks, geese. I'm trying to do something here. Shut up. Don't you poop on me. Go away. Go away. Stop talking. Go. Fly faster. Thank you. But yeah, as you can see here, this is actually diamond plot. So, that's why I like to keep this guy around. Again, this is also from the era where I was using steel bolts. This one had a little bit bigger diameter, so the bolts really tore into it a bit more. This one never had a wrist loop. But yeah, chocolate brown and black. I actually really like the way these colors blend. I might make another one similar to this, but it'll be like a good version of it. Again, this is from the zero binding era. This was just a core, 2 bellies, and an overlay. And it really shows in the rollout. It just kind of flops around like a wet noodle. Are you uncomfortable yet? Good, because I am too. This guy's up next on the chopping block. This is actually a little bro's whip. And what's unique about this one, well, kind of unique, is it uses a steel cable for a core. Yeah, it's not so unique now that you say it out loud. What is kind of unique, though, is this is the only whip I ever used a hollow steel tubing, kind of, sort of thing, for the handle of the whip.
Are you sure about that?
And allowed me to pull off this cool thing, because I could drill holes through it and pull them out, and I got like this cool cobra end knot thing with this like cool little thing. And actually, I really like the way this handle turned out. It's simplistic, but also kind of complicated looking at the same time. And I like the way that the purple and the yellow blend together. It just turned out to be a very nice whip for me. But again, steel core cable, which is nice to pull off little quick snap, crackle, and pops. But if you're actually trying to do a routine with it, well, kind of. You can kind of pull off a routine, but for like crack it like you mean it whips, this is more like a toy. So, yeah, there we go. Okay, next up on the chopping block is this guy. If you couldn't tell by how loud that is, this guy is actually the last in the line of whips that I used steel nuts in the end knot. This is also my last, actually my second and last cable cord whip. This is also an excellent example of what happens when you have too many strands for the diameter of your whip. I don't know if it really comes out. Here we go. This is a good example right here. You see how all these strands are kind of like bunched up? That means there's not enough space for them to evenly cover the bellies and the core. This is actually my grandpa's whip, which I am planning on replacing this year for Christmas, because by my standards now, this would never come out of my shop. So at the time, this was like the best I had. Now I wouldn't even think of making something like this. So sorry, Grandpa, I'll do better next time. Okay, here's where things start to get a little bit more interesting. This is the first in line of what I call Black and Green Era, which has led up to all my personal whips that I have today. This was actually the second edition of what I call War Whips. The first one I actually sold to a kid named Tristan. He still has it. Tristan, if you're watching, I'm still working on your other whip. Some stuff happened. I got set back. But soon. Hopefully soon. There we go. Fingers crossed. Hopefully soon. And anyways, this is the second in the line of what I call War Whips. The reason why I call them War Whips is at the time, this was the heaviest whip I ever made, with 3 BB loaded cores. Unfortunately, this was pre-binding and bolster era, which all but like one of my dark green and black whips are, which is unfortunate because my 12-footer is not part of this era, which I wish it was. Anyways, back to the War Whip. It contains a wooden dowel as the end nut, which makes it really nice for bashing people's heads, hence war. It has this nice thing right here, which looks like it'd be nice for punching people's heads, but instead it collapses like this, and is really good for crushing your hand between bolts and a bunch of paracord. Like, that hurts more than me just punching the rock straight up. So it was supposed to be warlike, but not warlike. And the heavyweight just was supposed to hand itself to being warlike. So there we go, version 2 of the War Whip. Version 1 was kind of the same, only with only 1 shot loaded core instead of 3. The setup was very similar. Okay, next we have this guy. Again, pre-bolster, pre-binding. This is just a little 3-foot snake whip that I made for kids at the ranch to play with. Nothing special, except for it was the first whip that I ever had in English I2, so I guess that's kind of special. And we got like a dime sticking out of the end knot is sort of my concho. So nothing really that special about it. On to the next. Go off screen. There we go. Alright, next we have this guy. This guy is my big boy. My big boy without bolsters or binding, which kills me right now, because it would handle a lot nicer if it did. Honestly, at this point, well, sorry, there's no bolsters. There's binding. There's no bolsters. So, at first, it handled like a dream, but after it got broke in, a lot of its springiness is gone. It's a little bit harder to crack now. I don't take that as I can't get it to crack. Man, this thing is loud when you let it out, but as of right now, it's a little unwieldy. I'm like the only guy I know who can crack it. I'm sure someone like Adam Winrich could probably pick it up and pull off a couple tricks with it, but as of right now, this is like my baby. This is like in those cowboy movies, that one horse that only the hero can ride. Nobody else can ride him. Also, side note, I forgot to show it, but the War Whip had these little cool dots. These are actually the nails that hold the end knot into place. that kind of showed through on the outside. I continued it with this whip on both the transition and the heel knot. Also, this was really my first real attempt to fancy plate a handle, and also it's the first whip where the irregular herringbone pattern comes out, which is something that I'm starting to make a standard for the transition section of all my whips, because I just really like the way it looks compared to regular. You can kind of see, compare and contrast right here. This is irregular, this is regular. I just like the way that looks a lot better. Unfortunately, I don't have the patience to do it for the whole length of the whip. As guys, when I first started experimenting with nylon bolsters, you may be wondering, nylon bolsters, what does it mean, like hockey tape? No, I don't mean hockey tape. I make bolsters out of 2-inch nylon straps, like that. And you cut them to the size you want, and it simulates sort of like cowhide bolsters, or just leather bolsters in general. So this is the first whip that uses it. As you can see right here, I gauged how much to use. I don't know how to explain it. So basically, with the 2-inch bolster, the first belly you can wrap it around, and then you kind of taper cut it. So you cut a taper into it so it evenly wraps around the whole thing. With the second belly, you actually have to take the bolster and spiral it around the belly. I didn't come up with that until after this whip. So this whip actually has 2 nylon straps, one wrapped 3/4 of the way around one way, the other one wrapped 3/4 of the way around the other way. So they're like overlap for almost half an inch in the middle, and that just really makes the springiness overpowered. It cracks so easily. The downside is when you're trying to carry it, it keeps popping out of my holster. Note, this is also my first real experiment in making something other than, what do we have here? This is a 3-pass 5x4 Turk's head knot. This is different. I basically just kept weaving these until I couldn't add any more strands to it. Also, irregular herringbone on the handle. This is an 8-footer. This was my first attempt to add a bigger wrist strap than, say, this on my 12-footer. I also forgot to point this out, but this was like a cool little thing. I also have the spiral on the 12-footer too that I didn't show you. I forgot about that. But yeah, ever since this whip, I just really like the way this wrist strap looks. I have developed new ways of pulling this off. This one is done just the standard way. You weave the strands, you lay each end on either side of the overlay, you bind over it, make your end knot, foundation, and then put nails or staples through, just hold it all in place. And if you can see, it kind of cost me, because in the actual knot right here, there's gaps where it kind of stretched out, and on the side where the wrist strap is actually laid on the overlay, they're covered up, and the space was just like just a little bit too big to cover. So that's a little problem. That's why I switched the way I do wrist straps, because that kept happening and I didn't like that. Next is this guy. This is really the last whip, or this is the second to last whip that I've made that doesn't include a bolster. This has binding but no bolster. This is just a little 4-foot snake whip. Not too much to write home about. Lightweight handle. The transition-ish knot that I have here has no foundation, so it slips around. I have remedied this in later designs. This wrist strap is attached the same way as this wrist strap right here, this one. The difference being why there's not that much of a bulge is because it's thinner, and I don't like the way these thinner wrist straps look. So that's why I came up with a new way to do the wrist straps, just to kind of get around it, because the only way to not have those gaps and still do it this way was to make the wrist strap thinner, and I just didn't like that. Here we have the 3-pass 5x4 Turk's head. Little grapevine handle-ish wrap. This was just to be sort of a suggested place because I was making this for kids to play with, so I wanted to give them a nice grip handle. Really just standard herringbone all the way down, and yeah, not much to write home about. Next up is this guy. This guy was the next in line of war whips. This guy is unique because I attempted to do irregular herringbone all the way down the whip. I actually got to right here about halfway before I had to stop because it was just getting too ridiculous to attempt to pull off. The knuckle protection is the same as the last war whip. There's no like frame to it. Oh, those geese are gonna bug the crap out of me. Standard grapevine handle grip, which is what I like to use for these war whips. Gives you a nice grip and just feels right. This was the first whip that I started using my new knot foundation material. It's this rubbery stuff that I have a lot of. Up until this point I was using leather from belts, like old belts that people thrown out. So with this addition, it's rubber, so that way it actually grips the knot, so it's already really stable before you add the staples or nails to it. So for like a little 3-foot whip, if you just wrap it around tightly, bind it real good, and then tie the knot, I wouldn't recommend it. You could technically get away without supporting the end knot with any staples or nails or anything like that. This is also third to last whip that I have done recently with the nails and the end knot. And I think that's a quarter. Sorry, this isn't the one I did the dollar piece in. But yeah, that's a quarter. Alright, next we are moving on to the black and neon green era. This is the era we are still currently in. Granted, the actual design of cord I used has just recently changed. I was using in this era, I started off using this stuff, which is of course black, and then this neon green with a black diamond pattern through it. Now initially I really liked the way this looked, but recently I've discovered it's just a little bit too busy for my liking, for my taste. Just a little bit too busy. I need something a little bit simpler. This one still involved attaching the wrist strap the same way, so this end knot is just a little bit oblong. I don't know if you can see that. This used bolsters. The problem with this one is the bolsters covered each belly completely, and in leather whips you can get away with that because just the way the leather flows, but in nylon whips you get to the end of your second belly and then it just kind of drops off. The rigidity drops off too significantly to be a smooth rollout. So that's why I haven't really used this one in any videos. I think all my other whips, except for one, have been used in recent showcase videos. But yeah, this was the first. This was the trendsetter of what we have now. So good job to you. It deserves a little bit of recognition at least. This guy, while not the one to set the trend of black and neon green, is the one to get me started in officially doing fancy plating. Now, I've had this thing in a couple of videos. I can't remember if one got... I know at least one got released on YouTube. I think the other one's only on Facebook. But this was my first real attempt at fancy plating in a whip. As you can see, we got an Egyptian's eye here. Got a couple of bracelets. And right here, we have the star attraction, which was actual letters that I plated in to the handle. I'll see if I can edit a little bit so you can see this better. But it's actually an M, P, and an A, which of course stands for Mid-Michigan-Practical-Arts. Now this whip has no binding, no bolsters. This was an experiment to see how nice I can make a whip look. This is a showpiece. This is not a working whip. So this is something I can take with me and show people some designs that I can make in their whip. If you notice, this whip also ends in a 6-point plot, which of course means a 6-point fall hitch. I've gotten away from that more recently. This was the beginning of this summer versus the end of this summer, which is merging into a 2-point fall hitch era, which I actually just started last night. So yay! Happy New Era! What is this? The year of the fall hitch? The 2-point? Yay! This guy is up next. This is also a more recent one, which was a bullwhip with just a standard core, which implemented a bunch of fancy plating, a new type of transition knot, which, by the way, I have now gained the knowledge of how to actually tie Turk's head knots without going and finding a YouTube video every time I want to do it. We got an Egyptian's eye on the handle. This cool little bracelet that I just kind of came up with. By the way, all of this fancy plating, I use a program called Faceplate. It's just an in-browser program to do all this. It's really simple. This is, I want to say, yeah, this is the last whip that used the technique of taking the wrist strap and actually binding it to the overlay. Get it to focus. You can see some pretty significant cracks there in the actual end knot. So this was the last of a type of wrist strap era. Next up is an unfinished whip, but I wanted to bring it out here to show you guys, because while I kind of just stopped working on it and moved on to bigger things, this was an experiment. This is the first whip that implements my new style of doing wrist loops. The way this works is the wrist loop is actually a part of the second belly. You take the length of the strands you need for the second belly, you add about 1.5 feet to them, you find the center, and you weave the wrist strap out of the second belly. And then you merge into the second belly the same way you would like the keeper for a stock whip. Overall, it's just an extremely simple little 3-footer. It does have an English eye onto it. I've heard a lot of people say that implementing English eyes instead of the standard fall hitch is easier than the standard fall hitch, but either I haven't mastered it yet, or I don't know. Maybe I just notice things a little bit more than other people. That might be it. But I just noticed these little kinks where you have to add a strand, where you can't pull as hard. They kind of open up. I have this problem where I don't like to use super glue. I know some people like super glue the new strands in, but I tried that and I found it made these little rigid parts that wouldn't bend because the super glue would soak into the other layer. It would just be really bad. It didn't turn out good. You can actually see where I added a strand in right there. Right there, focus. There we go. Right there. And it just, I can see it. It creates little kinks where you add strands. Whereas if you're pulling tight enough when you're doing a standard fall hitch, that doesn't happen. I do like the fact that because you're adding strands instead of dropping strands, you only have to like measure out 2, and then you just make the next strand as long as what's left. If that doesn't make sense to you, go watch Caliber Whip's video about it. He's better explaining that stuff than I am. I'm creative. I'm more creative. I'm more creative because I branched off and I made this crazy thing right here. This piece of insanity is my newest war whip. This implements the weaving the wrist strap into the second belly. This also implements 3 shot loaded cores, ton of fancy plating. We got MMPA, or MPA, as I say. Sounds a little weird, but whatever. This is the first whip. Granted, it still moves, but this is the first whip to actually implement a rigid knuckle protection. There's actually steel rods in here, so that way your knuckle is actually protected. It's got a bit of chainmail woven in there. Overall, it's an extremely heavy whip. It's loud. It properly does bolsters. I pulled off a good bolster, couple bolsters with this one. And also, my binding was getting better, this one too. Up until this point, my binding was like subpar. It's gotten to the point where it's A-okay. Right? Yeah, that's how it is. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah, there we go. It's pretty good. And that, of course, leads us to here. Now, you might have seen this guy in the lineup, but in case you didn't, I just want to talk to him a bit before I show you. This guy looks simple and clean. In fact, it's because it's technically the second, but this is what I'm calling the first in line of my simple standards. These are what you get for about $400 to $500, depending on the length. And they're very flashy, very simple. But man, do they look clean, man. These are nice. Look at this thing. This little pattern on the handle, which I designed myself. This is 3 shot-loaded cores. These are 3 lead-loaded cores. Everything else to implement 3 cores up to this point has been BBs. And this turned out great. We have, of course, I just showed you this, the nice handle plate, which, man, it just turned out really nice. We got irregular herringbone here, was transitioned into regular herringbone. Here we got a 2-point fall hitch. This nice wrist strap, which is, again, part of the, well, in this only has 1 belly, so it's part of the first belly. The reason why this, in all my other ones that have the 3 shot-loaded cores, have only 1 belly. That's not including the overlay. You have bellies and overlay. It only has 1 belly because the core, once you get it all put together, is like the size of a normal core plus the first belly. And the rigidity in the transition area, which then fades out because the shot-loaded cores taper off. It's kind of complicated. Essentially, it has more rigidity and a little bit more diameter than a standard core, plus a plated belly. So therefore, you can get away with making only 1 belly. But yeah, this guy just turned out beautifully. I'm really dying to go crack it, but it's kind of morning right now, and there's a neighbor like right over there. So, what time is it? It would be a good time to check the time. Let's check the time. 9:09. Hang on. Let's call Pops. See what he has to say. Yeah, we're going to. Hey, I was just wondering. It's like 9:10. Is it okay to crack whips now, or is it still too early? Okay. Alright, that's all I want to know. What?
Where are you working at?
I am out at the Thinking Rock right now.
Okay.
Yep.
Alright.
Yep, bye. It's whip cracking time. Let's do this. Okay. Oh man, this thing's nice. I gotta go. play with this thing now. If you guys did enjoy it and you want to know how you can get your own simple standard, please either go down to the comments, ask me, or you go check out my Facebook page or email me at midmichiganpracticalarts@gmail.com. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful fall morning. And with that being said, I'm going to see you all in the next video.